Hi there. Welcome to Bourbon Turntable. We are the show that blends the love of music with the love of whiskey. With me tonight, as always, my friend Drew Crawley. Drew, how are you,
Howdy, sir. I'm doing great. I'm enjoying a little bit of cooler weather today, eating chili, watching scary movies on Netflix, all the good things to kick off the fall season.
All right. And understand you had a very interesting, unique show that you played at recently.
Oh yeah. Last night, as we're recording this, so there's an organization. It's multinational, but it's so far, and it's Songs from a Room. And so they bring in three different musical artists. You get 20 minutes, and it's bring your own beer, usually in someone's living room. Last night we were in a barber shop slash art gallery slash clothing designer store. So very eclectic group over in the Highlands here, and I was between a R&B singer and a hip hop artist. The R&B guy was from St. Louis, and the rapper was from Atlanta. So they got three very different looks last night. If you were in the audience, but it was fun. We all, probably had a little too much to drink and enjoyed some new music. Got to meet some cool people. So definitely different than the raging alcoholic bar gigs and covers and you yelling Freebird that we're also used to. So
you got to do what you got to do.
I feel like there's only two places on the face of the planet that can even happen, and the Highlands and Brooklyn, New York come to mind. So
yeah.
And you in our audience will know that those are the dulcet tones of one Alan Bishop. Hey, Alan, how are you?
Hey, I'm all right.
Survive roller coasters?
I mean, if I'm dead, I haven't yet come to the realization that I am. So sure.
You seem to be very much alive, so we're all very thankful.
Hey, go south quick.
Yeah.
Good.
Well, our guest tonight, and we'll get into our guest in just a few minutes. Our guest tonight is Erik Wolfe from Stoll Wolfe Distillery. Erik's going to join us, talk with us about the whiskey that they're making, talk with us about the legendary Dick Stoll that he worked with for a good many years, and then we're going to talk with him about some music too. But before we do that, we want to tell you about the Bar Cart Co-op. Bar Cart Co-op is a collection of friends who love to make really good content for the whiskey public. We have Distillers Talk, which is a show that Alan is on with Christy Atkinson. They talk with distillers from around the country, really around the globe, probably even elsewhere. Speaking of elsewhere, he also has a show called If You Have Ghosts, You Have Everything, which touches into the supernatural aspects of the spirit world, really getting both sides of that word in there. They talk some about whiskey, but not exclusively. But that's a very interesting show. And Alan does that with his wife, Kim. My Whiskey Den, those guys, Mike and Pat, their show airs every Monday night at 9 o'clock Eastern Time. They are the show where craft whiskey is king. And then you have our show, Bourbon Turntable. And you know about it because you're listening to it now. So we have one more very special announcement for you. Stay tuned.
All right. Don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe, hit the bell notification to find out when new episodes come out, which is every Wednesdays on all of your streaming services everywhere. Apple, Spotify, whatever other ones there are, and the YouTube where you can watch the live recording itself.
Thanks, Mike. As always, terrific job. So tonight, as I mentioned, we have Erik Wolfe with us of Stoll Wolfe. And Erik, welcome to the show.
Thank you guys for the chance to be here, and always a pleasure to talk whiskey. So,
we are looking forward to talking whiskey with you. And so, as we're starting out, give us a little of your background, how you got into the distillation game.
So it's pretty interesting. They always say, "Thank God for unanswered prayers." So, I tried to sort of avoid being in Lancaster County and doing what I'm doing. Got out, moved to New York City, thought that I would never come back to Lancaster again. It was sort of a smaller area and a small town. And when I was in the big city, I realized that I was an idiot and that I had really been surrounded by an embarrassment of riches. And I guess that's part of youth is sort of figuring out what you don't want. So that was sort of a revelation to me. I was working. I'd done some internet stuff back prior to September 11th. Was living in New York when September 11th happened, and realized that I wanted to do something with my hands, and had been also working in restaurants. The slow food movement had been happening, so started to really investigate some of our local food traditions, and was embarrassed to find out that whiskey had such a rich history in our area, and something that I was ignorant of. And as someone who prided themselves on really being steeped in local history, it was pretty amazing to me. And I figured that if something I didn't know much about, there was a good chance that a lot of others were not there as well. So I'm the type of person, whether it's history or music, I find influences and then just kind of dig and just sort of pull on them. There's a great quote, I believe it's John Muir, where it says if you pull on a string and keep pulling on it, essentially the whole universe unravels. And it's so interesting, the connections that are made that way. So started researching the local history and realized that one of the gentlemen that had one of the biggest influences on the modern era of distilling in this area was a gentleman by the name of Dick Stoll. And not only had he been in the industry for over 4 decades, he was actually still alive, and nobody was working with him at that point, which was just mind-blowing to me. Dick was the most analog guy ever. Although that said, he was in the Korean War in the Navy and did work on the Forerunner jet. So definitely very adept at picking up technology. But he didn't have an email address, had no interest in having an email address. The internet was not something he was particularly interested in. So thankfully, his wife, Elaine, had made some connections in a few online message boards, and a gentleman by the name of Ethan Smith, a local whiskey historian and Pennsylvania Michter's he's so dedicated to preserving the history, put Dick and I and Elaine and my wife and my father together. And it's one of those things that I've had the chance to sort of look back on it many times now and sort of think about it. And I still don't know why he was crazy enough to listen to us. Thank God he was. I also was surprised that there wasn't a line 100 people deep with people much worthier than myself to learn at this gentleman's feet, given his knowledge and his history. But thankfully, nobody else had. And for us, it was one of those things where the first time we met Dick, it was like we'd always known one another. And then all these sort of coincidences, in air quotes, sort of started happening. All these things that, so long answer to a very short question. I feel like I found distilling as much as distilling found me. And it's interesting because you talk to a lot of distillers, and it's one of those things where it grabs you. And then once it does, forget it, you're done for. But for me, it was really the history and the food traditions of our area that led me to it. And then the more that I was able to be exposed to the industry, the more I was able to learn. Learning distilling is always an interesting thing. It's not something you can legally do necessarily in a home environment. So hypothetically speaking, I had done a lot of hypothetical experiments prior to meeting Dick. So having somebody like Dick that you could just hit with 100 questions, and you guys got sort of a preview of, or not a preview, but a peek of that when Al and I were just discussing prior to the show, just a mash and some of the where distillers are problem solvers by nature. They're sort of engineers by nature and want to help one another engineer and distill and figure out different problems. And so to be able to have that in Dick is just this sort of immediate kinship. And I know even earlier today, I hit Alan with a text, and within like, I don't know, 15 minutes, I mean, the guy's recovering from the roller coaster, he's got a family, but took the time to get back to me about this whiskey question where, again, I think there's just a certain geekery that once you sort of pierce that veil and you connect with someone else who shares that geekery, there's just an immediate kinship there. So for Dick and I, that really was apparent immediately. And then the more we got to hang out, the more that he, my grandfather, my father's father, passed about a year and a half before I was born. But it turned out that Dick was born the same year, went to high school very close to where my grandfather did, was in the same tour in the Navy. They were on ships that were very close to one another. So to have that sort of influence in my life and to be able to speak to someone of that generation, of that sort of upbringing, and have that, he became a member of our family as much as a business partner and a mentor. So for us, I don't know, there's a lot of time with whiskey production that you're by yourself and no one's looking. And if you wanted to cut corners, you could, and no one would know the difference. But I would never do that to our customers, just as a matter of respect. But I would die before I would let Dick Stoll down. So there's so many times when you're tired, you're dusty, you've got rye mash caked all over you, you do the right thing, and again, no one would know. But I know what Dick Stoll would have done. I know that he, for 4.5 decades, helped preserve a legacy that was hundreds of years old. And so for us, it's just, I don't know, it's this amazing opportunity to both carry on that tradition and honor Dick. And that's another thing is, unfortunately, Dick passed away at 86 years young. But for us, as much as we miss him and want to ask him so many things on a daily basis, more just for confirmation that we're doing what he would have done in those situations. There's always variations while you're distilling. And again, as we always say, Dick's first comment would be, "What are you doing? Get the hell back to work. Why are you even thinking about me and talking about me? It's the whiskey that." So for us, it's to have that ability to physically throw yourself into producing something to honor somebody is also a pretty awesome opportunity.
Yeah, that's awesome.
That is fantastic. So we're going to want to go down that path just a little bit more, but while we're doing that, I want us to go ahead and pour some of the Rosen Rye white whiskey, which is the bottle on the far right of this photo. So guys, go ahead and pour that, and we'll be tasting it. And while we're doing that, Erik, tell us a little bit about what Rosen Rye is and what makes it different.
Sure. So Rosen was a varietal of rye that was brought over by a Russian immigrant, turn of the century, as I understand it, in the 1900s. Grown primarily in Michigan, with a lot in Pennsylvania as well. And then due to the era that it was imported versus when it grew in popularity, it ended up being distilled quite a bit in Pennsylvania, whether it was grown in Michigan or Pennsylvania. And the last person to have the opportunity to distill Rosen was Dick Stoll, when he was with Michter's here in Pennsylvania. So for us to be able to work with somebody like Laura Patrizio, who has the Delaware Valley Fields Foundation and the Seed Spark campaign, and to be able to work with them and be the first folks to have the opportunity to distill it in 5 decades was really a huge honor. Like anything else, working with somebody that you admire so much and in attempting to preserve the history, as somebody who cares about it so much and is so dedicated to it, my biggest fear is messing it up. So there's a picture of us handing actually a hydrometer flask to Dick. We're very scientific here. We just pass around the hydrometer flask, but even Dick and allowed him to sample it. And I'm sure it was seconds, but the moments between his tongue registering the flavor and his mouth brain connection and smiling was possibly the longest moment of my life, other than my And what a sigh of relief that was. So yeah, for us, like all of our ryes, this is a sweet mash rye, so 100% fresh ingredients. It's a 60% rye, 30% corn, 10% malt. So Dick's thought on the corn in the rye was that if you want to make certain ingredients rounder or certain ingredients more present in a dish, sometimes by adding something that complements them, you can actually bring out more of the flavor. And the example we always use is chocolate cake. That if you want to bring out more of the cocoa notes, if you add a little bit of coffee to it, you don't taste the coffee in the chocolate. You actually taste different aspects of the cocoa. And with the corn and rye mash bill, that was something that Dick had been taught by Charlie Beam, and also very reminiscent of the Sam Thompson mash bill as well.
A little bit of a flavor bridge there, right?
Exactly.
Those kind of things.
In Eastern PA, we still grow so much corn, and there's a history of quite a bit of corn being grown. So it is quite likely a very Eastern Pennsylvania style of rye.
I want to throw in real quick here too, before we do any tasting notes. Just how special it is that you got to work with Dick as well, because you were in one of the major 4 to 5 distilling states that were really on the map before Prohibition hit and wiped everything out. And obviously Dick came in after that, but Pennsylvania was still moving right along regardless after Prohibition, even if it was just through 1 or 2 companies. And it's super special for any distiller to get to meet somebody that's sort of representing the legacy and the heritage of where they're from and how things were traditionally done. And dude, I think it's amazing that you got to study underneath Dick. And of course, you go back to that whole Everett Beam thing. You go back into the Pennsylvania Rye thing, the Whiskey Trust, and getting to work with Laura as well. Dude, what you guys are doing and what you've been doing is super special, you know. And I understand, like, you know, my heroes here in Southern Indiana, I'm 100 years removed from them dying, right? I can't imagine what it'd be like to have gotten a chance to work with any of those people and try to live up to that legacy.
Oh man, and thank you for saying so. It's it's always nice to hear good things, but as we've discussed many times, there's certain people in the industry that we kind of we mark ourselves against, and to have somebody like you that we respect so much say those things is really a huge honor. And the funniest thing about Dick is, as much as he knew, as amazingly knowledgeable as he was only matched by his humility. So you would talk to him about things, and it was just so matter of fact. And so, and we've had us ask people that don't necessarily understand some of the deeper reasons behind things from a scientific or biological standpoint. And the ultimate explanation to them is because Dick said so. To try and explain all the other scientific aspects that go into it, as far as they need to know, it's because Dick said so. But Dick said so based on generations of distillers knowing what worked. And a lot of times those guys had to figure out what worked without the benefit of so much of the science that we have now.
Yeah, they weren't going to the lab. They were figuring it out in real time.
It's unbelievable. And so many folks will ask us that on tours. How did those guys learn those things? And necessity is the mother of invention. And when you're standing there watching that still drip alcohol for hours every day, you have some time to ponder how to make that more efficient and what you can do to make it better.
So I do have to ask you this question too. So because Dick knew what he was doing, he's teaching you. Was there ever a moment where, like, and obviously, you know, you don't know what you don't know, and Dick's there, and you're there to learn from Dick, right? My question really is, did he ever, like, was there ever a moment where he gave you a look where he was like, you ask a question, he just gives you a look like, oh, you don't know this?
So that was the most amazing thing about Dick. And I hope I'm able to one day pass on the knowledge in the same even-tempered way that he did, where as a parent, I'd like to think that it's that I will be that way. He had the benefit of many years of age to mellow. But no, Dick was the most supportive mentor that I think anybody could ever ask for. And now keep in mind too that the first mortal thing I ever saw Dick Stoll do was pass away. So it was up in the air whether or not he was actually immortal prior to that. But he would be the first person when we were working together to say, look, I only have a limited amount of time left. And I'm grateful that I even got to get back behind a still. It's all gravy, essentially. Not a term he would have used, but essentially all gravy at that point. But he wanted to pass on the knowledge and definitely always was so... He inspired confidence in ourselves, even in times where we doubted ourselves, and really instilled so much knowledge. And there's always questions you wish you would have asked. There's always things that I never asked him for his signature just because I felt stupid asking him to autograph something, but what an idiot. I should have had him sign my back. I should have had him sign everything. It should anyway. But no, he was so supportive, and also the kind of guy who I think there's some distillers that are like, look, there's a way to do things, and that's the only way. And Dick was very open in that this is the way he was taught to do things, and there's certain markers and there's certain things that you need to hit. But how you achieve those, if there's efficiencies that have been developed, or if there's ways in our distillery because of the flow of certain things that are better to do that way. It was so interesting for Dick also, the fact that he was willing to, when he was working at Michter's in Pennsylvania, they were doing 60 barrels a day. I mean, they were a huge distillery. I mean, not huge, but very big relative to us. So the fact that he was willing to come back as part of a craft distillery, somebody who is doing 3 barrels a day is just, I mean, is such a difference. But I think for him to just get his hands back in grain and just be around the still was just so fantastic. And he really did share that joy. I think there's a certain, one of our taglines is, and it's on all of our bottles, is united by purpose. And I think when people love something and they're doing something they love, you see this spark in their eye and they become 10 years old again, or 25 years old again, and are just transferred to that place. And it may take them a little longer to do things. It may, I mean, Dick was strong as an ox. I mean, up until the end was, as Sam Komlenik, the whiskey writer and historian, has said, Dick was the kind of guy you wanted on your side if you had to get into a bar fight, no matter what he was. He was just such a good guy, but no, he was so supportive and really just the only time, Alan, to your question, that I felt stupid and it was me, it wasn't Dick, was I was trying to talk to him about aging environment and how to use technology to assist in replicating excellent single barrels. So I thought if we would use RFID tags on each of those barrels, that we'd be able to log all of them, and the best ones, we'd be able to take that data and then use that to make the next batch or the next series of single barrels. And Dick asked me what I planned to do with that information we collected with the RFID tags. So again, he was in his early 80s. I was in my mid 30s. So I figured, well, let me just explain to this gentleman the technology behind what I'm explaining, and then he'll get what. And again, he worked on jets, the forerunner of jets in the Korean War, not very technically inclined. So when I re-explained to him what I was planning on capturing, he very kindly reminded me that you can collect whatever data you want, but how do you replicate those exact changes in temperature? How do you know exactly where in the tree the staves came from off the barrel, what the growing seasons were, what the rings were? So at that point, I very quickly realized that I had so much more to learn and was very thankful that he was the person to do it. But just as a young distiller, to have the confidence to make the cuts where we make them, and even to have more confidence in laying down barrels and in what was going to come out of them is just, to us, such a huge, because that to me is one of the scariest things about having a craft distillery. Is you can run something, and that's great if it's experimental, but how many barrels do you run just in case it sucks? And then once you age them out, once they're great, then what? then you got to go back and redo them again. And then, so hopefully the public still has interest during that time. So for us to sort of, again, have that hand guiding us and to have so much knowledge going into it was really invaluable. And to hopefully preserve that, it was just so scary for us. There were a few setbacks along the way in opening the distillery. And my wife will attest to many sleepless nights spent where when you tell somebody that you respect so much that you will return them to distilling and you're a man of your word, you do what you say. However, thankfully, when you don't know what you don't know, sometimes it's good. It keeps you going and being too dumb to know when to quit. But it was definitely a major sigh of relief when we were able to actually return Dick Stoll to physically distilling, as opposed to that year and a half of when we promised him that we would, and until everything was actually running. So, but definitely very thankful to actually be making the whiskey as opposed to building the distillery.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about this white rye whiskey, this Rosen Rye, and then I've got another follow-up question on that.
Sure. It was real interesting to me as far as an unaged spirit. You've got a lot of that rich viscosity, all those kind of fatty acids come through in terms of texture-wise. You get some of the, the peppermint, kind of those things that you expect. But underneath that was a lot of really nice kind of an herbal and citrus combination, almost like a lemongrassy note that I really liked. Could almost pick up some kind of a graham note, kind of like a graham cracker type thing. So as far as an unaged spirit, there's a lot of kind of motion around the flavor wheel. You've got a lot of things going on that I like, and it makes me hopeful for some of the aged spirits. So I don't know anything from a technical standpoint. I'll let Alan talk about esters and acids and all that junk, but from what I'm tasting, it's very complex and delicious.
Oh, cheers! Thank you very much.
Yeah, so I've had this one before, and you've been kind enough to share a lot of your stuff with me over the years, Eric, and as always, I'm very impressed. So one of the things on the technical side, so the ethyl acetate that you have in there, like that, for people who are listening to this, it's almost think like ozone, like after it rains, that smell after it rains, right? It's beautiful. I love that. The other thing that I love is to me, on the nose and on the palate, it's just straight like pumpernickel bread. And I desperately want to sit down and have like a Reuben sandwich with this thing, because there's your fat kid tasting note.
Yeah.
Sounds great.
No, I was trying to think of how to describe that, because as the glass was sitting maybe, I don't know, 1.5 feet, 2 feet from me, and we were talking at the start of the show, I could smell it. The aromas coming out of the glass, and it was like that smells like freshness. and that makes sense, Alan, with the comment that you had about the ethyl acetate.
Well, and thank you everyone for the feedback. And it's interesting, Kevin, you mentioned the freshness, and Alan as well. Also Drew, the lemongrass you were discussing. We cut our spirits very differently when we're distilling for an unaged spirit versus an aged spirit. And for those of you that can sort of see the background here, we have a column still and then a doubler / thumper that's up there as well. So to hear somebody who's running a column still talking about cutting is a weird thing. It's sort of a disconnect, but we run our column based on Dick's input and the way our column runs very differently than a lot of other folks do. A column has the ability to make neutral grain spirits if you run it in a certain way. And for us, we know that without the barrel influence, it's going to drink very differently. And part of the reason that we wanted to release the Rosen as an unaged spirit is that the longer a spirit sits in the barrel, the more it will take on the characteristics of the barrel. There's always folks during every tour who, whether they admit it or not, are shocked to learn that whiskey comes off the still white. And for us as a varietal that we knew folks had never tasted before, we thought it would be a very interesting opportunity, almost a grain schnapps, and the ability to taste that whiskey without any barrel influence, and the ability to sort of make a mental note of where that comes in. And like you were saying, Drew, about all these different places in the tasting wheel. And it's interesting because so much of the tasting wheel is often barrel notes. So it's so interesting to be able to offer folks this opportunity to sort of taste something that is unaged, but also this unique varietal as well. And hopefully, once we do have more Rosen available, we'll be able to release those side by side.
Yeah,
That'd be cool.
I'll throw this in there too for people who haven't tried this stuff. So, and it's rare for me to say this about, so, and you guys know this about, somebody running a column still. And that's the beauty of the things that you've learned. So this is literally like, if there was a rye eau de vie, if there was a white brandy version of rye, this is exactly what it is. And the fact that ethyl acetate is there and it's not overwhelming. Listen, if you go, and I'm not knocking anybody, but if you go to most distilleries that are running a low rec Kentucky column still, what you're going to find is two things. You're going to find ethyl acetate on the white dog, so like fingernail polish remover, and you're probably going to find diacetyl, which is like buttered movie popcorn, and none of that is here. This has that ethyl acetate, which is a more earthy, like I said, like right after it rains outside sort of thing, and then that just pure Rosen Rye grain characteristic, and that is really rare to find with anybody running a column, and that speaks very much so to both Dick and also what you've learned both from Dick and on your own as well. So
no, thank you very much. And it's one of those things that when you're working on things in private, you hope that those will come through, but to have somebody like yourself say that is really huge praise. Thank you very much. Yeah, with the Rosen, it doesn't change the flavor of it at all. But one of the things that we're very proud of is having the ability to work with Laura to help revive the Keystone Rosen Rye. But we've also been able to. There's a farm that's been in my family since 1741, farmed by my family consistently since then. Cousins still farm it today. So the Rosen that you're tasting from last year's harvest, we were growing just under 2 acres last year, and we'll be scaling up to 5 this year. I don't know how everyone else's harvests were this year. This year was a brutal year with rain. We ended up actually about 35% below where we were with last year's Rosen harvest. Now it's our second Rosen harvest on the farm, so it was either going to be the best year or the worst year, just because it was the second year.
Right.
So we think we learned quite a bit from that. But also for us, our commitment to local grain is such that all of our corn is now coming from that family farm. It was coming from another local mill about 90 miles away, but the Rosen was again 35% lower this year. But we signed a contract saying that we're going to pay based on that first year. If it's more, we'll pay more. If it's ever less than that, we're going to meet that, just because for the farmers that are taking on that risk of growing those heritage varietals, that's a big risk. And in a traditional environment, they could bear 100% of that risk. And a lot of folks just are, myself included, before we got involved in all this, well, crop insurance will take care of that. And unfortunately, crop insurance is not for these small farms. It's just not worth it. Thankfully, we're in an area that is, Lancaster County is still the most productive non-irrigated farmland in all of America. Wow. California, Central Valley produces more, and Florida produces more, all with water imported from elsewhere. So thankfully, it's not something they need very often. But man, in years like this year, it can be pretty rough. So.
Erik, sorry, Kevin, I have one more quick question I think might be of interest to people who are listening to. So obviously you're working with Laura with the Fields Foundation and all that stuff with the Rosen Rye. And one thing I've always been curious about, and I'm not sure. So this is your second year growing it on the family farm, right? So are you guys actually going through and selecting seeds specifically adapted to the farm, or does that all go into like a pool? Or
no? So we actually, and it's so great because we read this book, and it's funny because just to pull out for 1 second on that, I I mentioned this to Alan before, but Kevin and Drew, Alan is the kind of guy who, as a distiller and as a creative person, you're always looking for that edge. You're always looking to find that sort of inspiration, that old manuscript that no one else has found, or this like cutting edge, and not even cutting edge, but just something that's an influence that, and it doesn't matter what rock you turn over, you will find Alan or Todd Leopold, and their fingerprints are already, which is awesome to us because it tells me I'm never going to find something more esoteric than they have. But if I see their torch marks on the wall, I know I'm looking in the right caves. So, Alan, to your point, and again, very long answer to a very specific question, we read this I got Laura this crazy book on landrace gardening. And I ordered the book, and I'm looking at the foreword to it. And I'm like, I got the book. I was like, man, I need to send Alan a copy of this. This is so cool. And I read the foreword, and I'm like, that son of a bitch wrote the foreword to this book. So, okay, I'm assuming he has read it then.
Yes, thank you, Joseph Lofthouse. Yes,
yeah, which is a fantastic book. If even if you were just fans of the whiskey industry, and geeks, it's really worth reading. But to your point, Alan, I think it's critical that we develop a strain that is adapted to our field specifically. We have a very unique sort of soil composition here in Lancaster County. Very chocolate brown, not a lot of clay, which is really nice. So for us, we're combining seeds over multiple years. The one thing that we weren't sure, and something that the book did seem to indicate was, is it fair to say that head plumpness and head size, there's a correlation between flavor, that you can assume that the healthier heads do have more flavor?
Well, that's an interesting question because and obviously agronomically it's going to adapt over time if you're selecting it for your farm and your conditions, right? And so it's going to be a better test weight, and all the normal agronomic stuff is going to be, worthwhile of its own accord, right? But I will tell you, and obviously being in Southern Indiana, I'm dealing with commodity rye is what I'm dealing with. But rye is the one grain that for me, we do not treat at all like a grain. I don't care what the test weight is. I don't care, how much comes in on the truck. What I'm after is the aromatics of the rye. I treat it like a botanical almost, right? Like as long as it smells good and there's some starch there we can convert into alcohol, I'm happy. And I will literally reject a heavy test weight rye for a low test weight rye, depending on the aromatics thereof, right?
Yeah.
But I think you can have the best of both worlds with what you're doing with selecting for your farm, right, to get where you want to go. And you have the opportunity there to be able to do that. And that's why I was so curious about that, because I didn't know if it was, I wasn't sure from talking to Laura if all the farms went together, they pulled their seed together, and then you send the seed out. But if you can select it for your farm, pick what you like, man. That's the beauty of it. So,
and that's thank you. And it's one of those things too, where it's so fascinating with the different approaches to farming. Even the one thing that has been consistent across all the farms was the seeding rate per acre, and the moisture content of the seeds going in. The stuff being grown in Western PA has been going in about 2 weeks earlier than the stuff in Eastern PA. So it's interesting to see how they tend to get a frost a little bit sooner than we do. They're on the western side of the Cumberland Gap. So I think that mountain range definitely does affect some of the growing conditions. That's very interesting to see. And the other thing that we've seen is that we were using a mixture of Danko Rosetto prior to this. Our yields have remained consistent with the Rosen. Now we get less per acre of the Rosen, but of the grain, the yield seems to be very consistent, which is pretty exciting for us.
So let's pour the rye next, guys. And while we're doing that, Erik, I wanted to ask you, you've talked a lot about the influence that Dick Stoll had on you, and the passion truly comes through in your voice. It's not just lip service. Your love and admiration and respect for that man is truly authentic in everything that you say. But how did you document the things that he was teaching you? Do you have like a novel written on your Mac, or do you have book after book after book where you've taken notes, or what have you done?
I was once told that if things aren't backed up in at least 3 places, they're not truly backed up. So I have many furiously scribbled handwritten notes that I would then copy into another book that then I have put on my computer as well. In true wacky distiller fashion, there's some aspects I put in code because you want to make sure that if it falls into the wrong hands, it's not whatever. So it sounds crazy. It's
amen
necessary, but it's weird. I feel like distillers are suspicious by nature. It's we just sort of with the soles of the shoes pointing the wrong direction kind of thing. So, and then there's obviously people like Alan that when you're speaking with, you're just so excited to share ideas. And then there's other people who will ask you questions, particularly on tours, where you're like, well, what are you going to do with that information? Or, if I came to where you work and asked for the secret sauce of so yeah, no, it's pretty interesting to see. But one thing that we're big believers of is that our process is so unique to the environment we produce it in that I'm sure even if somebody like Alan had our exact mash bill, yeast, everything else, and produced it on his equipment, it's just a different.
Right.
The vapor path is different in the distillation. The osmotic pressure is going to be different on the yeast based on his distillation, or I'm sorry, his fermentation tanks. So I think I'm always impressed when I speak with other distillers who are so knowledgeable and who are so free in sharing their information. I know Dick was very much like that. And I guess because of working with Dick, we've had many folks that had no reason to share so much with us as they did. And just freely, folks that, we'd go and meet with them with Dick and ask a million questions. And I've had folks take their notes, their clipboard with their whole process and just hand it to us and be like, well, what do you want to know? Like, here's everything here. Not that I'm not happy to answer it, but just here's all the information, and anything else you want to know, give us a call. So I do think it is, I think a lot of folks do talk about the collegiality and the camaraderie of the industry. And I think some folks wonder whether or not that's actually true. Mm-hmm. And I think amongst a lot of us who really care about the industry and who are very passionate about what we do, there really is. It's truly amazing the support that folks do offer.
Mm-hmm. Well, guys, what do you think about this rye?
So I'll throw this out there. So this is like full on. So that pumpernickel bread thing that I said earlier, this is where Kentucky meets Pennsylvania. So if you were to make bread pudding out of pumpernickel, that's what's going on there for me. So like that ethyl acetate has become this brown sugar caramel sweetness that's coming in, but you still have just enough of that oomph and that kind of that spiciness that's there. And I don't want to, I hate using the word spiciness for rye. I want to be more of, I guess, kind of a nutmeg or even like a cardamom sort of characteristic to it. This is even at the age that it's at right now, which is what 12 months. It's already headed in that direction of like almost a dessert whiskey, right? And it's not just a dessert whiskey where it's sweet and overwhelming. It's also a palate cleanser in a lot of ways, right? It's it's very crisp. It's very, very clean. It's still very representative of the grain, which is again odd for a column still distillation. But I absolutely love it just at 12 months. I mean, I like the white whiskey as it is, but even at just 12 months, this is exactly what, like, we use the term respect the grain. That's exactly what respect the grain is. I mean, you nailed that.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, that's extremely well said, Alan. I wouldn't have much to add other than just sort of the texture component of it. Yeah, I know we talked about a lot about avoiding the spice, but that nutmeg or the cinnamon really has that kind of confectionery, pastry type spice to it, right? Like the inside of a cinnamon roll. And the influence of the oak has sort of, I don't want to say mellowed in any way that seems negative, but it's sort of wrapped everything up in this nice little package where there's not one thing that just spikes off and one thing that jumps out here. It's very balanced now, especially for something that's only at a year old.
It's kind of rounded it off, right?
Yes,
it's taken off any of the rough edges that might have been there, and I don't mean that in terms of rough in terms of the distillate. I just mean in terms of the flavors that you're getting out of it.
Thank you. Well, and one of the things that we're big believers in, and just as an example of something that showed Dick Stoll's ability to take in new information and adapt, was, to my knowledge and to Dick's knowledge, the air drying of staves of barrels that they were getting when he was making whiskey was not something. It may have been something Coopers were doing, but it wasn't something that they were advertising, or something that the end consumer of the barrel, the distiller, knew anything about or was selecting. For us, there's a lot of folks, I know Alan's one of them, that believe that if you have to wait for the tannins to dissipate in a whiskey as it ages out, that what would be even nicer is to not put those tannins in the first place. So that's I think part of what's happening with the barrels that we're fortunate enough to use, is that without that really tannic sort of hit you in the jaw, almost acrid sort of note that can come into younger whiskeys. Also from a chemical standpoint, and I'm not smart enough to know exactly why this is, but a young rye definitely seems to drink better than a young bourbon. Alan, I don't know. I know I've asked this to Pat Heist as well, and something that I know folks have some theories on. But is there any concrete sort of evidence as to why a rye would drink differently than other than it's a grass versus a vegetable, like a corn?
Well, I mean, corn's a grass as well. I don't know of any hardcore scientific evidence. What I would say is, I suspect, again, and this goes back to the preferences with picking out rye. I would suspect because rye is a little more aromatic and it's a little more bold than what corn is, right? Yeah. That's probably part of it. And I also suspect because it's a little more bold and it's a little more aromatic, I suspect that overall, a conscientious distiller is probably paying a little more attention to a rye whiskey distillation than they might be to a corn-based distillation, where the bulk of it's just ethanol that's sweet, right? I'm going to throw another fat kid tasting note here, and I want to see if Drew and Kevin respond to this. All right, so Eric, I don't know if you have this where you're at. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But here in Southern Indiana and Kentucky, persimmon pudding is a huge thing.
That sounds delicious.
Yeah. And this has got that, like, you go to the church bake-off and you get the good persimmon pudding. There's the one dude, the one guy who's a bachelor. He's been a bachelor for 30 years. And he makes the best persimmon pudding on the face of the planet. This has got that going on for it. So,
apple butter by any chance?
What's that?
Is persimmon pudding like apple butter by any chance?
No, I don't know how to explain exactly.
It's a much darker. Like persimmon is a much darker flavor profile than like an apple butter.
Got it.
But
delicious.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, we're going to kind of wrap up side A of the show. We've got some one more whiskey to taste on side B. But before we get into that, we want to tell you a little bit about what's going on at the Alchemist cabinet. Alan Bishop, you wrote a book, or you put together a book or something. So tell us about that.
Yeah, I did a thing. Not well, but I did a thing. So yeah, this is the first book that I put out. grammatical errors intact, no proofreading whatsoever. So this is a sort of an overview of very early like distilling methodology that I came up with, plus a little bit of like biographical stuff explaining my background. And honestly, this was originally put together to basically pay for my little reenactment group, Hell's Half Acre, to go to the Popcorn Sutton Festival a couple of years ago and pay for gas. And so we did like 100 copies originally. I think that was 2017. And I didn't think much more of it. And I'd started noticing that it was being passed around on like home distilling groups. And I was like, well, maybe there's some levity there. Let's do something with it. So sent the link to Kim, my wife, and she turned it into a print on demand book and made it into a thing. And I don't know, it seems to be doing pretty well and people seem to enjoy it. I don't know if they enjoy it just for the historical value or the, some of the early methodology or some of the background stuff, whatever. But we've had a lot of fun sort of talking about it. And I don't know, I've signed a bunch of books. I know that. So you can get it, thealchemistcabinet.com/ the warehouse one, or you can also find a link directly to Amazon on the Alchemist Cabinet and buy the unautographed version. But there's a follow-up coming. I'm working on that now. And it's going to be a little bit more like the methodology I've developed over the past 7 or 8 years in the Black Forest region of Indiana, and some of the historical pictures and articles that I've picked up from newspapers and historical archives, stuff like that. So
very cool.
I have my copy of the book.
Yes,
it's not signed or anything, but I'll see if we can't get that fixed.
Don't judge me by my writing. Mm-hmm. it ain't that good.
Don't judge me by my writing in that book I wrote.
Right. Somebody was like, well, that makes you officially an author. And I'm like, well, the standard's not very high then, is it?
Well, no, it is a lot like, and I know Ellen, you'll get this reference. It's a lot like pulling segments out of the Foxfire books.
Very much so. Yes. Right. I tend to write like I speak. So, and I went, going to school and everything. It was, I grew up in the era, just like I'm sure Drew did, where everybody was like, don't use your accent. Right. Mm-hmm. And so I have kind of trained myself over the years to forget all that stuff. And I think it actually plays out better because of that, because it's a little slice of a time period of my life. So.
All right. Well, Alan, congratulations on the book and the success that you're experiencing with it. If you don't have it, order it. Go to thealchemistcabinet.com and you'll see the warehouse link at the top of the page. So just
send me money.
Send him money. Okay. All right. So we can afford to go back to Holiday World.
That's right.
Okay. We're going to go to side B of the show. And Erik, we want to talk with you some about music while we are pouring this blend that we've got. So one question that we ask every guest we have on the show: what was your first album? Do you remember the first album that you ever got?
So I'm old enough that I definitely remember. Music's such a huge part of my life. I remember, and I'm old enough that I actually bought records at the record store. So I got 2 with my Christmas money. It was U2's The Joshua Tree and Beach Boys' Greatest Hits. So definitely would set the tone for my lifelong appreciation of music, both what's new and interesting in new music, but also very steeped in sort of classic rock and pop music as well.
So what were your favorite songs off of each of those albums then?
Wow. So, okay. So, and keep in mind, I was in 2nd grade at the time. So it was definitely Bob Moran. Bob Moran was the, Surfing USA was a huge, and With or Without You, mostly because as a kid, this was when MTV actually played videos.
Yes.
And just seeing U2 in the Joshua Tree doing the video was, to my 2nd grade sensibilities, was one of the coolest things I'd ever seen at that time. So I didn't know exactly what cool was, but Bono was wearing like a vest with nothing under it. So
right.
And then, as I tell people all the time, seeing Guns N' Roses' Appetite for Destruction come out when I was like 13, I never really had a chance to be a normal person after that. It was just
Yeah.
sort of, wow, if these guys can get away with that, then yeah.
Well, your hair is a little bit like Bono's in that video,
Right?
I don't know if is there a ponytail?
There definitely is.
Well,
Yeah.
there you go. You all you need is the leather vest with no shirt under it, and your Bono.
That's it. And
be a little bit more pretentious, and then you're there.
Bono single because I too would be single after my wife would very quickly. Yeah. So, and to me, music is also proof that just because you love something doesn't mean you'll be good at it. I love music so much that I don't perform it. Because, and it's one of those things with, thankfully with distilling, if I spend time learning something, I feel like I can take it in and process it and maybe even add my own spin to certain things. Where music, it's more like, an animal is dying and painfully when I attempt to either play or sing. So
everybody's very talented in their car, though.
Right, that's it. Yeah, exactly. And in the shower, the acoustics are fantastic.
Yes, absolutely. So, do you remember your first concert?
So I definitely do, and we're very blessed here. We're in a very, very small, out of the way town, Lidditz, Pennsylvania, in Lancaster County. When folks come to visit us, it's not uncommon for them to get stuck behind a horse and buggy on their way in. That said, we also have some of the premier sound, staging, and lighting companies for all of these bands that actually live in our town and create these in our town. So oddly enough, when I was in middle school, Young Jet played a benefit concert for our rec center, which again, as a young person, to see somebody like Joe Jet at your rec center doing a concert was pretty amazing. And then also, I think a few months later, Mr. Big, who at that time was a very popular act, not necessarily the two concerts in retrospect that I would have picked as my first two, but I think it speaks to the power of live music that I was all in after that. I don't know, I often refer to going to see live music like going to church to a lot of folks, and that's not to discount the power of spirituality, more to say that I just find the physicality of a concert. I was always the guy, and still would be, who wanted to feel the bass, wanted to be close enough, and thought that it was fantastic when you were next to the speakers because you could really. So now that I've got a 12-year-old daughter and a wife who doesn't have hearing damage, they don't share those. But it's so much fun having a 12-year-old daughter and being able to turn her on to some of these songs. And there's certain songs where she'll sing something or start to play it, and she's shocked that I know these songs. Like, I just fell out of the sky yesterday, and that these songs haven't. So again, it sort of reminds me of what my parents must have gone through. And as much as when I was in the 90s listening to early 70s rock, it seemed like an eternity ago that those guys had played. Now I look back on songs that I'll hear on the radio and I'll get so excited because there's a Pavement song that comes on, or there's a Pixie song that comes on, or something that I'm really jamming out to. And then they'll come in and be like, and that's one from the vaults that from like, wow. Okay, to me, that's current, but yeah, it is like 25, 30 years ago now. So, and I think with music and spirits, there's just certain songs that when I hear them, I remember a very specific place that I was. I remember the people that were there. I remember the feelings that were, and certain spirits, just smelling them just instantly takes you back to that same place.
Yeah, most definitely. Beautiful.
So at the distillery, I mean, do you play music while in when you're distilling? Do you play? Is there music aspect to what's going on there?
We always have music going on in our tasting room. With distilling, it's as much as I'm a tattooed long hair, I am such a fanatic about safety with distilling, and I'm listening constantly for the pumps, the boiler, with code in Pennsylvania, and I'm sure many other areas, our boiler has to have a separate entrance from the rest of the distillery. So as much as it's safer to not be able to open the boiler door with alcohol vapor, I actually have to go about 75 yards around the building to get to the boiler door. And we do have some pumps there for a cooling tower and other stuff. So that's one of the few times in my life there isn't music on. In the tasting room, we always have a pretty eclectic mix playing, very heavy on classic blues. I would say the only uniting characteristic of the rest of the songs we play is just that they're good. I feel like music, much like comedy, can be a lot of different things. The only thing it has to do is move you in some way. Right. So for us, we love hearing songs that folks don't expect to hear maybe in the distillery, but find themselves sort of enjoying. We do a Wu-Tang Wednesdays here to mix it up a little bit, where my wife's from Brooklyn. I'm also, as much as I love classic rock, also grew up in an era of amazing hip hop. The same about the current era, but again, it makes me feel like an old man. I don't know if it's that I'm getting older or just that the music isn't as good as when I was young, but I guess I had a lot more time to dedicate to it back then as well.
So what I'm hearing is, if I walk into your tasting room, I'm not going to have to deal with Sills and Crofts Summer Breeze.
The problem is that Summer Breeze may be mixed in with some Wu-Tang. We are big fans of easy listening. Like certain Steely Dan songs, you will definitely find in our mix. There's we're equal opportunity, but you will not find any contemporary pop music. You may find some older, definitely some a lot of the soundtrack to Dazed and Confused you would probably hear, and things of that nature for sure.
Yeah.
So we're very blessed. We get about four different decades of folks that come into the tasting room. So it's fun to both turn the kids on to the older stuff and turn the older folks on to some newer music as well.
Nice. Well, here's a question for you real quick before we jump into this one too. So if you had to pick one song for the Rosen Rye, for the rye whiskey.
Man, so this is probably pretentious of me, but man, Angel from Montgomery is just one of those songs that just, I feel like on the right set of speakers, like they can catch fire. Like it's such a tight song, and again, just that sort of earnestness, but also just sort of laying it all out there is very much our style. So,
are you going with language? Are you going with Prine's version or Bonnie Raitt or Tedeschi Trucks?
I always hear Prine's version, but then when I hear Bonnie Raitt's version, I'm like, damn, I need to listen to that version more. It's so good. And that's where when folks will ask us to pick our favorite whiskey that we produce, it's so hard. There's so many, it's so situationally specific, but I don't think you can go wrong with either of those two. That's like I was having a debate the other day, Voodoo Child. Is it Jimi Hendrix or do you have
Stevie Ray
Vaughan version? I mean, it's just, I think if Jimi Hendrix had heard the Stevie Ray Vaughan version, he might have said in the same way that Dylan said All Along the Watchtower is your song now to Stevie Ray, or to Jimi Hendrix, excuse me. I just created a mythical meeting between Dylan and Stevie Ray Vaughan. But anyway, but yeah, it's so.
No, I'm pretty sure that answer just won Bourbon Turntable for the year.
Yeah. That's literally like talking dirty to us, is talking about John Prine and whiskey. That's what we do when we're sitting around anyway. So.
Oh wow!
And I had a chance to meet the folks, such good folks from the Bourbon Distillery down in Kentucky, and man, we were working down at Mount Vernon together, and they both had their sleeves rolled up with a tattoo of John Prine's signature. They had the opportunity to meet him and went and just got the tattoo right after he signed. It was so fantastic.
That's so cool.
Yeah, they're
Putting that on the Mud Fossil Christmas list right now.
Yes. Absolutely. So let's talk about this blend, and then go for a few more whiskey or music questions, and then we'll let Erik get on with his evening. But I'll throw this out here real quick. First off, I get a rum note on the nose.
That's very interesting, and I wonder if that's some of the sweetness of the bourbon coming through.
Mm-hmm.
So we talked about flavor bridges earlier and the way that those contrasts work out, and this is interesting for me. So that bourbon is obviously there, and that sweetness comes through, that caramel note comes through. But what I get more than that is from that small proportion of rye. That rye starts to go a little bit more floral. It starts to get and I'm not going to say lavender. And most people get these confused, but there's another flower that is a relative of lavender. It's actually a variety of lavender called lavandin that's a little more earthy and pungent and heavier. And to me, overall on the nose, that's what comes through. Now on the palate, it's a little more light and airy. It's not as heavy as the two previous samples were. It's a little bit more like kind of effervescent in a way. It kind of dances around and lets you know that there's something really cool going on here, you know?
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, you mentioned earthy. I was going nutty kind of in my pursuit of that, and I was thinking honeysuckle, and then it hit me. There's those pistachio baklavas where you get the honey and the pastry and the nutty all together.
Absolutely.
And that to me is, when I was thinking through, it was like, oh, that's it right there. We kind of got all three of those layered in.
That's the one of the three samples that we've had tonight too, and I love all three of them. But this is the one who, like, the 12-month-old is the one that I love, and I'm going to go back to over and over again. But this is the sample that gets me in trouble on a weeknight. This is the one where I don't realize that I'm drinking.
This is one that I would like to do this with all of them, but the blend at barrel strength, I think would be very interesting, just because of the notes that we're getting off of it now. And Al and I agree. This is one for me that I could sit and just start pouring and listening to music and another pour, and before you know it, that bottle's pretty much vanished.
Thank you guys very much. Well, and this is the one that my mom, who she listens to all these podcasts. So hi, Mom. She's
Hi,
not
Mom.
a drinker, but this is the one that I can get her to drink straight. It's so funny how I feel like there's folks, and I think it's fair to say that she's one of those folks who, prior to the cocktail renaissance, or prior to more of her friends getting into drinking more craft spirits, it wasn't something that she had necessarily been exposed to a lot. So I think for folks who are sort of beginning to immerse themselves in craft spirits, or find themselves to not be a traditional whiskey drinker, that are looking for a more assertive whiskey, I think this is one that both folks who are more steeped in the whiskey world can appreciate some of the nuance in there, but also folks who just pick it up can really interact with it. So, and to get back to the music analogy, I think there's a lot of songs that are like that, where you have people sort of humming them. And again, we're no Beatles, but I always use the Beatles as an example. You don't have to have a musical knowledge of how amazing the Beatles are to appreciate the Beatles.
Right.
You can just hear it. You could hear it in another language; it would still be toe tapping. So thank you guys very much. It's
right.
Definitely a whiskey that, for folks that we deal with, we always have someone who gets drug along with the other friends that are really into whiskey, and they always will proudly tell us that they do not like whiskey, and there's no way they're going to like whiskey. And then we get really excited because we start digging through all the stuff, because we're going to find the one that they will like.
Right.
And it's so interesting. It's either this one or cask strength. And it's really interesting the way it goes one way or another. I think there's a few reasons for that, but yeah, it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, because there are bands that if any of their music becomes popular, people think that they've sold out, or they don't want to make anything. They want to make music, but they don't want to make anything that anybody would like.
Well, it's so true. And I think as a distiller and a distillery, Alan, I'm sure you've been through that as well, where there's some folks that get mad when they can't find something you made. And you're like, well, thankfully other people are also into it, because if we were just relying on you folks, that would be a big burden for you to carry for the distillery. But yeah, that is an interesting example.
But you have permission to make things that are appealing to the public.
Yes.
You know, a lot of times people will think, well, you're a craft distiller, you can't make anything that's going to draw people in that you know that may be into traditional Kentucky bourbon.
No, it's so true.
You can't replicate that. You wouldn't want to replicate that. That's a losing proposition all the way around. Why would you want to do something that's been done before? Okay, then you can spend your life as a cover band, and there's nothing wrong with cover bands, but
so true.
you're not going to gain that mass appeal. You're not going to gain a sustainable audience like that.
This is how you end up with an aquavit at your distillery, Erik.
I like your aquavit. Okay. But you know, making something, and to me, that's what this blend is, something that I think you can put it in front of any bourbon drinker, and they're going to say that hits all the right notes. That I like that. There are elements of that are going to appeal to me. Okay, now let's bring you in. Let's try some of these other things that are a little bit different.
No, it's so true. As sort of a baseline for a lot of those folks as well.
Yeah.
You know, and also even the proof speaks to that at 86 proof. That was the proof that Dick traditionally bottled at when he was at Vickers in Pennsylvania.
Right.
Our rye is 90, and obviously we go up from there. But I think the 86 it'll still hold up in a cocktail, but it's not quite as assertive. So
yeah.
Really good stuff.
So if we're driving from your house to the distillery with you, what's playing in the car right now?
That's a great question. So, you know, almost always is I listen to quite a bit to WXPN out of Philly. It's a college radio station out of UPenn, mostly because they do play so many of my favorites from growing up. They also play a lot of new college radio. So it makes me feel like I'm not completely out of touch. I spent so much time in the distillery that I'll hear things secondhand, and it'll be like, oh yeah, well, you didn't hear about that series. It was on for 5 years and everybody completely missed it. So that's one sort of connection with the outside world. But yeah, I would say quite a bit of 90s rock is in there. My wife and I went to see the Strokes recently. So also Spoon. So lots of sort of literate degenerates from the 90s.
If you could go to any time, and we have a very special time machine here on Bourbon Turntable, where you can transport yourself to any concert, anywhere, anytime, to see whoever you wanted to see, who would that be?
I would have to say to go backstage at Woodstock would be just, I'm sure some of it is hype, but just even reading a recent interview with Santana where he thought he had a lot more time to play, and the Dead, who were very skilled at dosing people, convinced him that he had a lot more time than he did. So just to see those folks that were so passionate about what they did and really had just sort of caught lightning in a bottle at a certain time, just to me, in some ways, it's like being in the tomb before they rolled the stone back, like to just see, man, that would be, and the only other one I can think of would be when Dylan went electric. I would like to have been the one voice in the crowd shouting down everyone else. I think would have been pretty amazing.
That would be very cool.
Awesome.
All right. Any other, Alan, Drew, any other questions for Erik before we pull it into the side B of the show?
Yep, I got one redneck question for you, Erik, because you're in Pennsylvania. Okay. So I've been every time they invite me on this show, I have to ask this question. So Ford or Chevy square body, late 80s.
Oh man, I'm a Ford guy. I can't help the. I just can't help it. It's the. If if I could, I would have like 4 of them in the driveway. My wife will not let me get a truck. Just good example. We were driving down the street the other day. There was an antique 6-panel solid wood door sitting there being thrown out for the trash. And she saw me look at it. And she's like, "It pains you that." And it really did. Like it was. I was thinking about going back, strapping it on the roof of the car, doing. Thankfully, on the way back, there were 2 other guys already arguing over it. It's Lancaster County. We don't let anything go to waste. But it's, so, and that's what I never understand is why people spend so much money on ugly new cars when there's amazing vintage trucks out there that just, I don't get it.
Those body lines, bro. Those body lines.
It just, and then they're clean. There's no dirt on the whole truck. Or on the boots. I don't get it. But anyway. So I guess that speaks to how I can't keep anything clean. But
I feel you, man. I feel you.
Well, Erik, we appreciate you joining us, man. This has just been fantastic. And like I said before, the passion and the true authenticity of your admiration of Dick Stoll and what he means to you is impressive. It is inspiring, and thank you for bringing him back into distilling for an incredible swan song with you. Thank you for documenting the things that you learned from him, and hang on to that, pass it down to the next generation as well, and keep that going, brother, because that is gold.
Thank you guys so much. It's such an honor to help in some way continue that legacy, and really just truly a labor of love to talk with folks like yourself about it as well. So thank you.
And as much as that too, man, you just keep doing what you're doing because you're on the right track, dude. It's good stuff, brother.
Oh man, thank you so much. It's one of those things that again, coming from you, that's I'll go to bed a happy man tonight. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate it, man.
Well, Erik, tell us and our audience where they can find you on social media and where they can find out about your products.
Sure. So we're at stollandwolfe.com. That's STOLLAND Wolfe, WOLFE.com. We're on social media, stollandwolfe.com or Stoll Wolfe Distillery, excuse me, and on Instagram as Stoll Wolfe. Please check out our website. You can find out where to find our products and drop us a line with any questions.
Fantastic. Alan, how about yourself?
You can find me at spiritsofFrenchlick.com, all of our products at sealbox.com. You can find my other projects at thealchemistcabinet.com and or Distillers Talk Podcast, wherever you get your podcast, or if you have Ghosts, you have everything, or the One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute on YouTube. This is getting ridiculous. Like I can't.
We're gonna have to scroll this like in the movies, like
right.
when you're watching a movie on TBS and the movie's over and they're scrolling the credits and it just goes real fast. Or get the guy that does the automobile commercials and talks real fast at the end with the tax title, license, and fees and all that crap.
No, what you do is you ask me last is what happens, and then you do like the screen roll like from Star Wars, like in a universe known as Pekin, Indiana, and then you just cut it off halfway through.
All right, Drew, how about you, buddy?
Yeah, you can find me at drew.crawley63 on Instagram. That's where I am trying to stay because I get nasty when I spend too much time on Twitter. But we are 7 or 8 weeks away from the release of the next single. We're getting ready to head back to the studio in a few weeks to make this next record. So follow along on Instagram for that.
Fantastic. Bourbon Turntable. We are on YouTube. You can subscribe to the show there if you want to watch it. That's something for your eyeballs. If you prefer something for your ear holes, you can listen to us on your favorite podcast platform, as long as that is Apple, Spotify, or Google. You can follow us on Facebook. We have a Facebook page and we have a Facebook group where you can come in. You can tell people what you're drinking, what you're listening to each night. And we also have an Instagram page with some really cool photos and all that good stuff. So you can check us out there. Drew, we've got some cool shows coming up here soon, don't we?
We've got some great shows. So we just finished up talking with Erik, but we're going to have a couple different bands, the Cold Stairs and Sweet Lady. We're going to have Brian Cushing from the Victorian Bar Room, David Jennings from Rare Bird, the folks from Lucky Seven, folks from Dancing Goat. We've got all kinds of stuff coming up throughout the next few weeks of shows. So please tune in for all of those.
Yeah, Nancy Fraley as well. So we just we've got some really good stuff. We're very fortunate, and in probably 2 months we'll be having our year-end Whiskey of the Year award show as well as our music award shows, and so check that out as well. Just hit that subscribe button so you don't miss a thing. All right, thank you all for being here on behalf of Alan and Drew. Erik, thank you very much for joining us. It was a real treat. We want to have you back again sometime soon. And until next time, cheers, love, and Freebird.
Cheers.
Night.
I hate Leonard Skinner.